Larry's words pierced through the silence of my hospital room as he entered with a smug smile. "You can't even manage basic household tasks. We should just get a divorce," he declared, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize, tethered to a maze of medical equipment. I observed them quietly, noting how oblivious Larry was to my true financial situation, $10 million to be precise. His suggestion felt almost absurd given the implications for someone like me, a housewife. Steadfast in my resolve, I realized I could no longer stay with someone who belittled me during such vulnerable moments. I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared for this very occasion. With a defiant smile, I handed them to him and watched as he accepted them, his expression shifting slightly. "I'll be happier with her, so don't worry," Larry proclaimed, draping his arm around the woman he introduced as Brenda. She looked at me with a condescending smirk and said, "Take care, ma'am. Not a miss anymore." With that, they left, laughter echoing down the hallway, their joy fleeting. Alone in the room, I couldn't help but burst into laughter myself. It was Friday, and by Monday, the divorce would be finalized. The thought of just 4 more days until my freedom filled me with exhilaration. My name is Natalie Ruth, a 40-year-old housewife living on a farm. While I may not have any special skills, I take immense pride in my cooking. Larry and I are the same age, having once walked the same college halls. After graduation, we left the countryside for Florida, settling into a life together. I often cooked for Larry, using fresh vegetables and rice sent from my family. Many believed my culinary skills were the key to his heart, and I couldn't argue with that. Larry has always struggled with any household chore. From our dating days, I took care of him, and that dynamic persisted after our marriage. Although we never had children, we found joy in our shared life, especially our mutual love for food. We would often take short trips on his days off, searching for new culinary experiences. In the beginning, Larry was gentle and kind, but about 2 years into our marriage, he began to change. He became more controlling, his words sharper, stinging like a whip. I grew weary of arguing, doubting that a full-time housewife like me could ever be heard. Larry had secured a prestigious job after university but left it within 5 years. Since then, he bounced between jobs, leaving our financial situation perpetually unstable. This uncertainty, paired with his increasingly harsh demeanor, made our relationship increasingly difficult. Despite everything, I continued to manage our home and held on to the hope for brighter days ahead. Our financial struggles were a constant presence in our lives, but Larry seemed to have found some stability at his latest job, where he had been for the past 3 years. He got along well with his colleagues, and I quietly wished he might stay there for the long haul. Then one day, he came home earlier than usual. "I'm home. I quit my job," he announced. Surprised, I blurted out, "What? Again?" His irritation was palpable. I could see his eyebrows twitch in response. Dropping everything, I rushed over to him. "I'm sorry. I was just shocked," I stammered, trying to backtrack. "No, welcome back," he retorted sharply. "You become quite audacious." Larry was clearly in a foul mood, and I feared that any wrong word could escalate the tension. "I'm sorry," I said carefully, trying to calm the brewing storm. He grumbled a bit but seemed somewhat placated as he sank into the sofa and turned on the TV. I quietly set a beer and a glass on the table. "Do you want dinner or a bath?" I asked. "Food and alcohol," he replied, and I slipped back into the role of the submissive wife I had played for the past 10 years of our marriage. After he had eaten and drunk to his satisfaction, Larry fell asleep on the sofa, snoring loudly. The table was a disaster, resembling a scene from a chaotic kitchen. I began to clean up, picking up fallen beer bottles and scraps of food from the floor. As I tidied up, I reflected on my life. This wasn't the marriage I had envisioned. Memories of happier days when I was a young girl in love surfaced, revealing emotions I had buried deep. I glanced at Larry, fast asleep with no signs of waking soon, and felt a mix of relief and dread. Was it worth continuing this life? Perhaps it was time to consider a divorce. The next day, while Larry started his job hunt, I signed the divorce papers at the city office. I wasn't ready to file them yet, but having them felt like a form of protection. I discreetly tucked the signed divorce papers at the bottom of my frequently used bag, anxious about how Larry would react if he ever discovered them. "Where did you wander off to while I was job hunting?" Larry asked when I returned home. "I went to the stationery store to buy some resumes," I replied, handing him the documents. "I thought you might need them." That day, Larry was unusually thoughtful. He questioned me at first, but soon lightened up after receiving the resumes. He mentioned he was going out for drinks with a friend, a gesture I welcomed. His new job was with a reputable company, offering a solid salary and better benefits than before. I secretly hoped this time Larry would stick with his job until retirement, especially since his new department was in sales. As the weeks went by, Larry began spending more evenings out for entertainment, which left me with cherished moments of solitude. I used this time to recharge, always managing a smile for him upon his return. One afternoon, a call from my mother broke the routine. It had been a while since we last spoke, and her bubbling excitement was infectious. "We had our mountains and lands appraised, and they're worth $9 million, she exclaimed. "We only need $5 million to enjoy our retirement, so you should consider what this means for you." My mother had always been skeptical of Larry, particularly as he grew more controlling and even prevented me from visiting my childhood home. The news of the windfall shocked me, but what truly stunned me was learning that she had transferred the property titles from my grandmother to me to avoid inheritance taxes. Now, faced with a critical decision, I pondered whether to share this news with Larry or keep it as my secret leverage toward newfound freedom. A week later, life threw another curveball my way. I was involved in a traffic accident. Although my injuries weren't life-threatening, they required a lengthy hospital stay. After securing my valuables in the drawer of my hospital room, I reluctantly called Larry to inform him. "I'm sorry I got injured," I said. His first reaction was shockingly self-centered. "What about my meals?" he asked. I held back my frustration and explained, "I'll need to be hospitalized for a week. Could you manage your meals until then?" His response lacked any semblance of understanding or empathy. That night, I had planned to discuss the inheritance with him, but his callousness made me reconsider. As I lay in the hospital bed surrounded by medical equipment, an unsettling intuition settled over me regarding the events to come. When Larry visited, he confirmed my worst fears with his first words. "You're useless, you can't even do housework. Let's get a divorce, and you'd better pay me compensation," he sneered, completely oblivious to my financial situation. A young woman stood beside him, smirking disdainfully at my plight. With grim resolve, I knew I could no longer stay with someone who would treat his wife so harshly in her time of need. I retrieved the divorce papers I had kept as a sort of talisman and handed them to him with a forced smile. "Here, I guess it's time we said goodbye," I said. Larry's smug grin widened as he took the papers. "I'll be happier with her," he declared, draping his arm around the woman he introduced as Brenda. She leaned against him and mockingly said, "Take care, madam." "Oh, you're not a madam anymore. Take care, old lady." They left the room, laughter trailing behind them, and a bittersweet relief washed over me. Free from his disdain, I now faced the future with a significant inheritance and a life to rebuild on my terms. Lying in my hospital bed that Friday, laughter bubbled up inside me. The divorce papers had been served, and by Monday, they would be processed. The weekend passed in peaceful silence. Larry didn't attempt to contact me, a welcome respite that felt oddly unsettling after years of constant activity. However, come Monday evening, my phone began to ring incessantly. After about half an hour of persistent calls, I finally decided to pick up. Larry's voice greeted me, loud and irate, expressing his fury that the divorce papers hadn't been processed as he had expected. His anger only fueled my laughter, which seemed to infuriate him further. "I've already filed a notice of non-acceptance," I told him between chuckles, reminding him of his frequent threats to divorce during our petty arguments. Larry was clearly agitated, quickly demanding that I withdraw the notice. But I was no longer the woman who jumped at his command. I calmly explained that nothing could be done until I was discharged from the hospital and that we would need to sort this out at the municipal office. His selfishness became almost comical as he blurted out his intentions to register his marriage with Brenda, the woman he had introduced as his new companion. In a panic, he corrected himself, scrambling to regain control of the situation. When I playfully asked if her name was Brenda and if she was his mistress, he replied, "She's my new wife and technically your mistress since we're not divorced yet." His absurdity only fueled my calm demeanor, which seemed to frustrate him further. Choosing to shift the tone, I informed him that he would soon hear from my lawyer regarding the division of our assets. I emphasized that I had always managed our household and remained faithful, highlighting his role in the deterioration of our marriage. Larry looked genuinely perplexed, as if my inability to handle housework from a hospital bed was a betrayal. I explained patiently that my hospitalization didn't equate to negligence on my part, and that his failure to support me during this time revealed his true character. The conversation ended with Larry flustered and at a loss, a stark contrast to the confident man who had left the hospital room with a smirk just days before. As I recuperated in my hospital bed, the absurdity of his expectations became increasingly clear. He seemed to believe that, even as an adult, I was responsible for his well-being, equating my inability to manage household chores due to my hospitalization with neglect. His logic was so skewed that it would likely astonish even a judge. Despite gradually grasping the situation, he stubbornly clung to his belief that he was justified, especially now that he had Brenda by his side, and claimed he no longer needed me. I sharply reminded him that his secret relationship with Brenda constituted cheating, a point he refused to accept. Frustrated and tired of our circular arguments, I decisively ended the conversation, instructing him to communicate through our lawyers from that point forward. I hung up, tuning out the barrage of calls that followed until he eventually stopped. However, my peace was short-lived. The next morning, my phone began ringing incessantly starting at 8:00 a.m. When I pressed the call button, I was immediately met with Larry's complaints about his inability to withdraw money from a bank account. He seemed puzzled as to why he couldn't access funds from what he assumed was a joint account. "Are you trying to withdraw from my personal account?" I asked. "Yes," he confirmed, his anger flaring. It was clear he didn't understand the protective measures I had put in place before being hospitalized. I had called the bank to temporarily block any withdrawals, anticipating that Larry might recklessly tap into my savings while I was incapacitated. "Authorize a withdrawal immediately," he demanded, failing to see the impropriety of trying to access money from an account belonging to someone he was divorcing. I calmly explained that we were effectively strangers now, and that I had no obligations to finance a stranger. My newfound assertiveness shocked him. He was unaccustomed to me standing my ground. He insisted that I send him money, even suggesting that I owed him compensation for not performing household duties. It seemed that, despite his education, Larry lacked basic common sense. After 12 years of marriage, I was treating him with the same patience one might extend to a child. I reiterated that any financial settlements would be handled through our lawyers. Larry's frustration boiled over, and he threatened to visit me in the hospital. Unfazed by his threats, I remained calm, prepared to face him if necessary, confident in my decision to stand up for myself and break free from the manipulative dynamics of our marriage. After our conversation, I had preemptively informed the nursing staff to allow only my parents to visit, ensuring that Larry couldn't just barge into my room. Despite this, he attempted to visit but was stopped at the nurse's station. He switched tactics, flooding my phone with calls and messages instead. I saved these messages as evidence and contacted my lawyer, who promptly addressed the situation, causing the incessant notifications to cease. Just as I began to relax, thinking the drama was subsiding, an unexpected twist emerged. I was informed that Denise, a longtime friend with whom I had lost touch after marriage, was coming to visit. Denise and I shared a rich history of dining adventures, fueled by our mutual love for food, which we often discuss on social media. She came by to express her concern over my accident and brought shocking news about Brenda, the young woman involved with Larry. To my astonishment, Denise revealed that Brenda was her niece and confessed to overhearing her plans to marry a 40-year-old man. When Denise saw a photo of the supposed fiancé, she recognized him as my husband Larry. The coincidence and deceit were staggering. Denise had already informed her sister about the situation and was considering demanding compensation from Brenda for the distress caused. She assured me of her unwavering support and expressed her desire to maintain our friendship, regardless of the familial ties to my marital strife. She had even arranged a meeting to address these issues directly with her sister and Brenda. Filled with gratitude for Denise's steadfast support and buoyed by our friendship of over 15 years, I left the hospital the next day and headed to a private dining room in a restaurant where our meeting was set to take place. To my surprise, I found Larry and Brenda already there, casually enjoying an expensive traditional meal. Larry, ever audacious, had the gall to remind me to bring money to pay for their meal. Firm in my resolve, I refused, instructing them to settle their own bill. I was there not to subsidize their lunch but to assert my rights regarding our assets. Ignoring Larry's rude remarks, my lawyer and I took our seats at the table. We laid out the evidence clearly, presenting legal documents and statements that detailed Larry's faults and outlined the terms for the division of our property. The papers made it abundantly clear that the responsibility for the dissolution of our marriage rested squarely on his shoulders, and I was prepared to defend my interests vigorously. As the meeting progressed, Denise made her entrance just as Larry and Brenda were enjoying their meal, completely unaware of the confrontation that awaited them. We presented a series of damning photographs taken by Denise, which showed Larry and Brenda together, and even more shockingly, Brenda entering a hotel with another man. The surprise and guilt on their faces were palpable as they halted their meal. Denise, expressing her loyalty to me, voiced her deep disappointment in Brenda's actions but affirmed her desire to remain friends with me despite seeking compensation from her niece. In the heat of the confrontation, Brenda blurted out that she was pregnant, which visibly shocked Larry. However, the claim quickly unraveled when Denise, skeptical, noted that Brenda showed no signs of pregnancy. Under pressure, Brenda admitted to fabricating the pregnancy story as a ploy to secure Larry's commitment, confessing that she had been targeting affluent older men. Caught in a web of lies and deceit, Larry was left speechless. Denise took charge of the situation, leading a remorseful Brenda away and promising a more formal apology later. Left alone with me, Larry scrambled to salvage our relationship, pleading for a fresh start and lamenting his deception of Brenda. He even attempted to leverage my lack of recent work experience to suggest that I couldn't manage on my own. I firmly rejected his advances, revealing my substantial personal net worth, estimated at around $10 million, which I had acquired through inheritance funds that were not marital assets. With my financial independence assured, I reiterated my intention to proceed with the divorce. The fallout from this revelation was swift. Under pressure from her family, Brenda transferred a sum of money into my account as compensation, and her mother ensured she worked to make amends. Larry, now estranged from both his family and Brenda's, faced severe repercussions. He was dismissed from his job for his indiscretions and resorted to multiple construction jobs to manage his debts. Once the divorce was finalized, I redirected the funds I received to charity and relocated to the countryside to start anew. Meanwhile, Denise and I rekindled our friendship, making plans to remain single, live together, and indulge in our shared passion for food and travel. We looked forward to beginning this new chapter, embarking on culinary tours and taking short trips to celebrate our freedom and the enduring strength of our friendship. Excitement filled me as I prepared for a future where I could live joyfully and authentically, true to myself.